Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me thank you for being here. The stories on this podcast are meant to let you know that you're not alone in what you're going through and that we can all find strength in struggle with the right perspective. If you've been enjoying the podcast, let me ask that you leave a review on your platform of choice to help us grow so that we can continue to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 186. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in the great state of Texas, we have a very, 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 very special guest, Michael Lombard, aka the Truck Man in my mind. I think that's a new one for you. Has anybody ever called you the Truck Man?
Nobody's ever called me the Truck Man. Nobody's also ever introduced me with that many varies, and so I'm super honored by that. But I've been referred to as like the trucker's athlete, so to speak, in certain ways. And I know that there have been several drivers who've called me, the Goggins of trucking on TikTok before. But you're not that far off. There's definitely people, especially in Austin and within the community, who like whenever something trucking comes up, they just direct it right towards me. I'm like the guy they go to for all things like supply chain related. So it's which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself to people listening who might not know who you are?
Yeah, I always love this opportunity, especially to tell the story because it's there's a couple layers to it. Because if you see me on the internet, like my username is Lombard Trucking, and I like to start there because it has everything to do with my family story, which is a lot of motivation behind what I do. It's what gives me a lot of fire in everything I've been doing, especially recently within the last 5 years. But I called myself Lombard Trucking on the internet when I first made a Twitter account in 2010 because of my family's company and my family's name. My family used to own a motor carrier based out of Waterbury, Connecticut. This is something my great grandfather started. Him and his brother. So this is Nicky and his brother John Lombard. They had 8 horses and 2 carriages that became 2 trucks and became a motor carrier in 1923. And it was a 3-generation lasting company. It was lasted for the bulk of the 20th century. It became one of the largest motor carriers in the Northeast with terminals from Baltimore to Maine. It employed several drivers. They had 12 terminals at its height. My grandfather himself, which is one of the things I'm most proud of, is he became one of the owners of that company, and his primary job as the owner of that company was to be a driver. So, like in the truest sense, he was an owner operator of Lombard. Lombard itself they did end up selling in 1984. And again, this is an entirely different podcast. But the reason why they sold is there was a piece of legislation in 1980 that was signed by Jimmy Carter called the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. And it deregulated the industry. My family's company being a Teamster affiliate, they were heavily affected by that. And it became incredibly difficult to compete with the elimination of the ICC. These are all crazy freight terms, so I don't want to lose your listeners too much. So they did end up selling, but I grew up with my grandfather, and I grew up with kind of his spirit. I mean, and my grandfather is who raised my father, and so I was raised under that. I was raised by that mentality, that blue collar mentality. My father is somebody who has gone through some struggles himself. He struggled with alcohol. He was an alcoholic. He quit drinking in 1993 when I was, only 3 years old. So obviously this is something that was happening early on in my childhood. He never finished high school himself, but my dad himself owns a small parts manufacturer up in Plainville, Connecticut, where he does centerless grinding. And so that's kind of how I was brought up with that. It was that kind of mentality, that kind of mindset. My dad was a Harley guy, and so that's kind of the stuff that I fell into. A little bit about myself, like getting into my story. I grew up a swimmer, so to speak. basically that was what my parents threw me into when I was like 5, 6 years old. I went to high school in Waterbury, Connecticut, where my dad did not complete high school, and I swam there. I ended up joining the Marines right out of high school, which is incredibly important because joining the Marines was definitely one of the most I mean, it's one of the top three decisions I've ever made in my life, and top three most important, I'd say. And the reason why I joined the Marines is kind of dissimilar to other people. At the time I joined, I had signed my contract in 2007, and we're at the height of the Iraq War, and there was and George Bush's State of the Union that year in January of 2007 called for another big push in recruiting because we were kind of going back into Afghanistan, and so there was a lot of hype around that, why people were joining, and obviously 9/11 not too much in the rearview mirror was why a lot of people were motivated. I mean, my brother had joined the Navy in 2003 himself. But I joined because I 100% did not want to go to college. Again, referring back to everything of how I was raised, I didn't have this idea that college was necessarily for me. I remember my senior year, I wrote my first 10-page paper in a political science class. Really cool project, by the way, might I say. Like we were given the synopsis of like a fake country, like and all their resources, and then using stuff from the textbook, we had to figure out what form of government, what we would do to have this company or have this country, so to speak, succeed, like what they could do to possibly like build their economy up. So it was like a fun paper to write, but it was the most exhausting thing I had ever done uh, at all, like mentally, like writing a 10-page paper. I did not type this, by the way. This is handwritten. Um, I went to a Catholic high school, so yeah, I had to break out the pen and paper for it. And I remember being like, I'm gonna have to do this again next year. This isn't over. Like it's gonna continue. This is gonna continue. And what was it for? I was like, what is this getting me? Like, is this getting me a skill? Knowing full well what my dad does, like, and he didn't finish high school. Like, so how is this going to make me money one day? It didn't really make sense. And I remember feeling, and this was the first time I ever felt really like lost in the fall of 2007. And I was at a Wendy's on Wolcott Road in Waterbury. I don't ever forget it. I was eating a Baconator, and by myself. Loosened up my tie, and I was like, discouraged. I felt pretty sad and defeated, lost. Like, what am I going to do? Like, who am I supposed to be? And that's when another gentleman who graduated a year before me, he walks in with a couple of recruiters. They're wearing dress blues and sales 101. His name's Kevin. He comes over, says what's up to me, and he doesn't even talk about the Marine Corps once. He sits down and he's just asking me about me. He's asking me about my life. What am I doing? How's school? How's theater? Like, you getting ready for swim season, just talking about my life, which is like exactly what any good salesperson is going to do. And then at the end of our conversation, he's like, "Well, hey man, I know you're applying to Southern Connecticut and all these other schools, but like if if you're thinking about it all, feel free to give this is my recruiter's card. You can give him a call." No brainer. Called the next day, and this was in November of 2007, and I had signed the contract in December of
Wow.
2007. Like it was a that was my ticket out. Like, are you kidding me? I cannot go to college. We're the greatest uniform on the face of the planet, and still be quote successful. Like easy out. And so, not to like brush over because I know we'll come back to it later, but I served for 4 years in the Marine Corps. I did deploy to Afghanistan. My MOS was 0844. I did fire direction control, which is in the artillery field. So the job itself, you communicate with forward observers who send fire missions to the FDC, the Fire Direction Center. We calculate that data digitally and manually. There's a couple different ways to get firing data, and then the FDC relays that to the gun line to the 777s down, and they send the indirect fire downrange. And I did deploy in November 2010 to May of 2011. We supported two infantry battalions in northern Helmand province, where we were on an artillery mission. So it was I'm very proud that we were able to do our job overseas. Other people in artillery on deployment, sometimes they go on ship, sometimes they've been provisional infantry. So it was really cool to be able to bring all the training like to into theater. So it's definitely honored to do that. One of the coolest things I did in the Marine Corps, though, was I went to a water survival instructor school, which was like 3 weeks. It's a 3 week course, very difficult. I was in that with a couple of recon guys, and when I've posted this on LinkedIn before, the roster of who graduated because it had a lot of attrition. It started out, and almost half of the people don't make it through the course, and you see like the units a lot of the people are with, and they're in recon or they're doing these kind of more difficult jobs, and then you just have like me and C battery 110, which is it's really funny. I'm this odd man sticking out. I ended up not staying in the Marines because while I was in, I did meet the a woman who is now my wife, and that's definitely something I wrestled with, which I know we can get into in a little bit, because I definitely got out because part of the reason why I got out is all my friends did and guys I deployed with, the people who stayed in, they all went to different units. And at 22 years old, your friends are leaving. You see what they're doing, and it seems like a logical choice. I definitely wanted to move home, so I wasn't long distance anymore with my girlfriend. But you know, I would have looking back now. It's like at 22, I wasn't thinking about what a career looked like. Again, at 22 years old, I was the exact same place I was when I was 17 years old. What am I going to do? Who am I supposed to be now? I continue to kick that can down the road. But now I had this outlet to where after getting out of the Marines, I was able to go to college off of the GI Bill. So I didn't have to accrue costs because that was something in high school. I remember my mom told me about student loans. And I was like, this sounds like the biggest racket I've ever heard of. I said, this can't be real. Like this much money. I remember seeing dollar signs with commas, and I was like, it costs this much to go to school. Like this can't be like, and how am I supposed to pay for it? Like, what job am I going to get that would pay for it? So it's like it's a racket. But now that I had the GI Bill, it's like okay, I can go to school. And I went to school in 2012. I graduated in 2016. I kind of want to speed run through this so we can kind of like go back because obviously there's an entire story from 2012 really to through 2020 of
Sure.
of really where there's a lot of transformation change and a lot of dark periods. But I graduated in 2016. I worked about a year and a half in a sales role at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, where that was also going nowhere. But I found myself connected with somebody I did go to college with, who ended up getting me an operations job in a warehouse, and that's where kind of logistics had entered into the space. So I got onto the warehousing side of it, and did a lot of stuff with inventory control and all things that had to do with the operations, purchase orders, reports, stuff to keep the open orders, keeping the warehouse stocked, all the stuff with central distribution, and that's where I was dealing with, started really working with truckers a lot, and I was talking to them very much every day. I drove a couple of our local delivery trucks a few times whenever I needed to, but I was talking to drivers pretty often, and that was kind of like the seed that was planted is like talking to these drivers every day, kind of seeing and talking to them and seeing how they carried themselves, how they had conversations with me, and kind of thinking about where my next move was going to be. And what's crazy enough, because we can break this down, is I was offered a promotion in 2019 to run a store and warehouse in North Jersey, which I turned down because I negotiated the salary and it didn't go my way. And there's a reason why I negotiated that salary, and it had everything to do with a fitness transformation I was making. And, the stipulations of what they wanted me to do, moving 5 weeks before my wedding, it just didn't make sense. It definitely wasn't right. And from that point forward, I was like, this might be it. My wife and I had a conversation after we got married about leaving Connecticut. And I was gonna, I drew a line in the sand, like I'm going to do this. I'm going
Mhm.
to get my CDL. I'm going to honor my family's legacy. Just ignoring what my grandfather told me his whole life, which is don't do it, don't get into it. It's full of bottom feeders. It's not the same. It's not what it was in my day, which I think happens in a lot of professions. But I said I drew the line and said I'm going to live up to what I've been calling myself on the internet. I'm going to become Lombard Trucking, and that's what I did in 2020. It's been 5 years since we moved, actually. And as soon as I got to Texas, that's when I had gotten my CDL. I was over the road for 3 years. I owned my own truck for about 18 months of those 3 years. I came off the road at the end of 2023, towards the end of like fall 2023. And from there, I actually was working, I worked full time as a fitness coach at Orange Theory, as well as a driver recruiter. And then I became the head coach at two Orange Theory studios for all of 2024. And then at the end of 2024 is when I started my full-time job with a company that's been one of the fastest growing companies in the industry called Truck Parking Club, which is like the Airbnb of truck parking being a major issue that the industry faces. So that's kind of like the shortest version of my life story. And I know that that went on for several minutes, but let's dive into it.
Mike, you are without a doubt one of the most passionate people I've ever met. And that's one of the reasons why I think you attract so many good humans around you. Just for a little bit of context, the way that we got connected was through Chris Gabayan, who is episode 126 of this podcast. Great person. And when we first interacted, it was under the idea that maybe you would be interested in joining Team Endure for 2025, which you're now part of. And you strike me as one of the most interesting people in the world. There's so much to dive into. One of those things that is interesting to me is your love of history, which we didn't even touch on. And maybe we can sprinkle that in through the conversation. But I'll ask you the first big question and we'll see where it takes us. So, when you look back at your life so far, out of everything you just described, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
Yeah, the hardest thing I've had to handle was definitely while I was deployed in Afghanistan. One of our, one of my very good friends, he's a brother. His name's Billy, William Krause or Billy Krause, or we called him Big Papa Pump. Great guy, phenomenal. And he was KIA while we were in Afghanistan. He was killed on December 21st, 2010, near the Kajaki Dam in a roadside bomb attack. He was a dog handler himself. And what made it so incredibly difficult was the fact that it happened about 20, 25 miles or so from where we were located. So it's interesting enough because he was in our unit. He was with Charlie Battery. So to kind of break it down, I was in 1st Battalion, 10th Marines, and there were three firing batteries and one headquarters battery. A battery is similar to what you'd call a company. It's simply a group of people with cannons instead of just troops, to kind of break down the terminology. And so he was attached with a Bravo battery. I was with Charlie, and they were up in kind of a different region. But he had trained with us, and worked up with us throughout that deployment. This is a guy who I drove out in the pouring rain to go. It's called. I had to fill up a Gatorade bottle of gas because his motorcycle ran out of gas once. It was like super funny how he called me too. Like, so this is a guy who we were really tight with. Somebody, weekends in Wilmington, like the real, like those real good times. And the day it happened is what made it so tough, because like I'll tell you, like if the Taliban were smart and they knew that this, like where we were at in Afghanistan, which is called the Firebase Edinburgh, if they knew like that we had found that out that day, they could have probably walked right up to that HESCO barrier and just like jumped right over. Like everybody was so depleted. And we were actually leaving the gym, and there's a flag that they put up whenever like basically, so there was like, you had little gaps of time where you were able to use the internet over there in a certain part of where we were located, and they would put a flag up when they would kind of stop the use of that because of certain traffic going on, like communication that needed to happen, like critical information, because they didn't want news to get out. Normally, it happened whenever there was some sort of death or there was some sort of engagement happening nearby in the area. And so when that flag went up, me and a good friend of mine, we were walking back from the gym, and we were like, dang, we knew that it was another like American who was probably killed, and we were like, dang that, that's so it hurt to see. And then I get back to the FDC, and like, you could have heard a pin drop, and it's like something I had no control over. It's no choice how we heard about it. And then the worst part is this happened in December, and we were still there until May. So I mean, this happened barely 2 months into the deployment, and so you kind of had to, like, that had to sit with you, because we couldn't even talk to anybody from Bravo Battery until we all got back to, Manas, Kyrgyzstan, or we got back to Camp Leatherneck back in May. So we couldn't even get like what the other guy, like the guys who were with him out on that patrol, like we couldn't even talk to them and hear about what happened until so much later. And I mean, I was 20 years old when I found out that this had happened. And, I was essentially one of my friends, people I went to high school with, people I had known who had really known somebody who had been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Other people I'm sure had known or had relatives, but in my direct friend group, and it was something I had never thought that I would ever experience in my life, like being, especially at 20 years old. And it's like it was it's a feeling I won't soon forget. Like it's crazy. I even kind of feel it in my chest now, like thinking about us walking back and seeing that flag up, like knowing that an American was killed, and then you find out of all the Americans, it's like one of your best friends. So I'd say that that would go down as the hardest thing I've ever done without, where I didn't choose it at all.
Yeah. From that point on, how have you changed as a person as a result of that loss?
I mean, as a result of that loss, I'd say that that's where a lot of my true like patriotism has come from, because again, I didn't join the military out of a sense of duty. I didn't join out of like an inherent love of country. It's not that I was like it's not that I was anti, but I was a regular, person. I wasn't like, super, love the 4th of July every year. Like it's not like something I, was really, really beat my chest over, so to speak. But I'd say really from that point forward is where I kind of realized just how special the United States is, just how special people who join the military are, because by all means, that could have been me who was killed. That could have been really anybody. And when you think about, and especially knowing Billy, who he was and who he is, and his life, where he came from before, and everything about him, how he is just like everybody else, but yet he still signed up to go do this and do this job willingly. And so it's definitely where I got such an innate sense of pride for the men and women who do serve in the military, and for just our country in general, that we have so many people who are kind of willing to make that decision at any moment. It's not like taking a job. And again, I took that job at the height of OEF, OIF, knowing full well, like I didn't enter the military like ignorant, thinking, oh, I'll never go to war. Like it can't happen to me. I knew that would happen. And part of me kind of wanted it to happen because I wanted to, kind of be something, because I guess if I had it or if I went, it would help me in a sort of way figure out who I wanted to be, if that kind of makes sense. But from that point forward is where I really realized just how really lucky we are. And it definitely gave me a really, really insane like sense of pride for Americans. And when I mean Americans, I mean everybody, like complete strangers, like communities, everywhere across the country. And I took, and because that followed with me all the way into trucking, because that's how I felt when I was over the road, is that wherever I went in the country, and I went to nooks and crannies of this country. I'm not just going to LA and Chicago and major cities. I'm going to places like Belfort, South Dakota, and I'm going to no name towns in Iowa where there's population who knows, and meeting these people, talking to them, and just the fact that, guys like Billy, aren't here anymore. He sacrificed himself for the random farmer in Iowa. I mean, it's, it's inspiring. And I'd say losing him is definitely how I've come forward from it.
Mm. In a way, it sounds like losing him has allowed you to see the connection that you have with everyone else. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, I walk all around and people pass me on the street, in the gym, on the trails. And the thought that crosses my mind more than anything is that's someone's life story is passing me by. I know nothing about that person, but deep down, I know there is a level that we can relate on. There's a human level that we can relate on, an emotional level where we have this understanding that it's hard to be here. Life is hard and we're all struggling with something. And I think that compassion, that empathy, that desire to see other people as valuable, sometimes that has to be born out of a really hard time in a really dark place. And so, with all that being said, Mike, I'd be curious to hear if there is a tie between your love of history, specifically your love of Napoleon, and your time serving our country in the military.
Yeah, what's crazy is I've definitely always been a history guy, and I think it might have everything to do with my family's company because what's really cool about it is that even the where the main headquarters was for Lombard Trucking in Waterbury, there's a strip mall plaza that's there now, and it's still called Lombard Plaza. And my grandfather owned it until about 2007 or nine. I forget when he eventually sold it. And that's where a lot of my family went after the trucking company sold, is they maintained the assets and they kind of got into real estate from there. And he ran that strip mall, and even after he sold it, the owners of it kept the name Lombard Plaza because of its relevance to the city. And and I've had a friend of mine who's a cop in Waterbury. He's like, dude, if you moved back tomorrow and ran for mayor, like this city, if they saw a Lombard on the ballot, there's certain names in the city, like there's certain last names that have rung out throughout Waterbury's history that people just know and they kind of trust. And that's who's become mayor, who has become mayor there in the past. He's like, you could probably win. And and so having a family name and a company that goes back to, some of Waterbury's earliest days, because for anybody who doesn't know, Waterbury was once, it was the brass city. This is a city that was on Hitler's bombing list, because of its relevance to brass production and what it did for ammunition and stuff during the, First and Second World Wars. It was definitely a manufacturing powerhouse. So it's a city with its history in itself. And so I always grew up with it. And growing up, I definitely was always fascinated by stuff in history. It was definitely my favorite class. I remember the first time I learned about the Trojan War, and I think I was in fourth or fifth grade, and thinking like, man, this is the coolest story I've ever heard. And so it's always like, I don't know why it stuck out, but maybe it's linked to, maybe it has everything to do with my family's company. But kind of going back to your question, which actually repeat the question, how does history tie into?
Yeah. So you love Napoleon. You love history, but I know you love Napoleon. Does
Yeah.
that at all tie into your time serving our country and being in that kind of I guess atmosphere of battle and war?
Absolutely, because of the type of leader Napoleon was, and because what's crazy about a guy like Napoleon is it's funny to say it because it's kind of a meme. If there's a more literally me type of guy, he is. There's so much about Napoleon that lives, I think, within everybody because he wasn't of any sort of grand nobility. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't from a certain family. He wasn't even from France, and yet became its emperor and rose to that occasion. Being from Corsica himself. So really, his story could have gone so many different ways. It could have been drifted in so many different ways. And when you really break into the biography, especially with what was going on politically in Corsica at the time with his father and kind of their demographic being like split between, because obviously Corsica was bought by France, so to speak. And so just knowing, like, especially being in the Marines, like knowing that just like Napoleon, you have every opportunity to kind of advance or succeed and build relationships with people and inspire people because of guys like him.
So I need to ask you about a Napoleon quote. So he once said, I believe, to cannons, all men are equal.
Hmm.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, you can take that quote in so many different ways because I think, and how I personally take it and why I think it's so relevant today as it probably was back then is again, like, you and I put our pants on the same way every morning. Like, you are no greater than anybody else. Like, whatever rank is on your collar, whatever title you put on LinkedIn, whether you're CEO or whoever, like, at the end of the day, you're not, the canon will not discriminate. Like,
Mm,
you're just as vulnerable. You have the same weaknesses as everybody else. You have the same strengths as anybody else. Good
I love
quote.
I love that. There are so many good Napoleon quotes, and this isn't one from him, but it is from Theodore Roosevelt, and it'll transition us nicely into the next question. So, Roosevelt once said, "Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, and difficulty. I have never in my life envied a human being who led an easy life. I have envied a great many people who led difficult lives and led them well." So, in your life up until this point, what's the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why did you choose to do that thing?
For sure. Number one, yeah, one of Teddy Roosevelt's best quotes because and it's funny that how powerful that quote is because it's why we like movies. It's why we read books. Like we don't read books to hear about the guy who's already rich
Mhm.
and just his day to day of running a company because what's the story? But yeah, the most difficult thing I ever did by choice was the first marathon I ever run. And the reason being is the first marathon I ever done had everything to do with where I was physically and mentally at the time. So I had gotten into to kind of again kind of shrink this for the listeners. I had in 2018 I was almost at a certain point, who knows? It's just what the scale said at the time. I was almost 280 pounds, 278 was the highest I ever saw. And it's since then I'm 100 pounds lighter than that and sometimes a little bit more, give or take what my current training has been. But either way, I have a 100-pound weight loss testimony, and so by the time 2022 came around, I was still about 215, 220, and I was an over-the-road truck driver at the time. And I read Goggins' first book in as soon as I went over the road in 2020 because I had started losing weight in 2018 through like building off of small habits over time
Mhm.
and going over the road. I knew the risks that came with this job. My grandfather had his first heart attack when he was 50. He passed away in 2013 due to complications that stemmed from heart disease. I knew that full well. And so and I knew that I was getting into a job that was going to, your health takes a back seat. I kind of knew that going in and I had researched that and I got into panic mode. I said, what am I going to do? And I had forced myself into running, something I had hated. We ran a lot in the Marine Corps, but you're running boots and it hurts. So after the Marines, you don't want to run. I played club lacrosse in college, but it was mainly like we didn't go for runs longer than 3 miles. That wasn't that often. It was mainly like sprinting and stuff in practice. And again, it was club lacrosse. I was still smoking cigarettes at the time. Like we were a party team. Like for all, like I definitely could and should have probably taken it a little bit more seriously. Neither here nor there. So by the time 2020 came around, like running 2.5 miles hurt. And I was just starting a job as a truck driver, but that's what I did to stay in shape. I didn't know what fitness was going to look like. And by the time 2022 came around, and it was time to, I would have probably tried to run that marathon in 2021, but because of COVID, Austin didn't have a full marathon. They only had a half, which I don't know, it didn't really make sense, but I probably would have tried to run it sooner because my mind was already there. I said, I've got to do this. I've got to do this because I wanted to, in my mind, after reading Goggins' book, I convinced myself, and the book convinced me that I need to be an outlier. I should be setting the example. And a lot of that also has everything to do with another good friend of mine who told me that I need to start making content about this. And so, like, I had this in my mind that I need to be an outlier. Austin Marathon comes in 2022. I've never ran longer than 13 miles ever. I don't know anything about nutrition. I don't know anything about gels, fuel, water, what I should eat because the only habit I knew of how to eat was how to eat in a calorie deficit. I didn't know anything about powders, gels, fuel, carbohydrates. I didn't know anything about it, but I was just going to hawk this run and say I could do it. My mind was already there. But when I tell you like it was hard, it was incredibly hard because of how my body felt because my body was nowhere near trained for it and because of that the lack of training and not knowing nutrition or anything I probably went to the bathroom like 7 8 times just having to take a leak and every time I stopped to take a leak it was like pulling my legs out of like concrete and like quite literally or like they were in quicksand like I had to pick them up to get them moving again like it was actually sludge so I mean, it just like it would physically hurt so bad. And up until that point, I'd say the most difficult thing I had done was something like maybe the crucible in boot camp, which is the last thing you do before you earn the title Marine, which is like a 3 day training exercise where you get little sleep and you're doing a lot of hiking and you're going to the firing range, you do some boxing, and that was difficult. But I was also 18, full of like vigor, and like you're already at the end of boot camp, so you really like push through and you're trying to prove yourself. Whereas doing that first marathon was an absolute blow because to anything I've ever done, because I've never done anything remotely close to endurance ever since I swam in high school. And it's just the sheer pain of it was definitely something that is the reason why I think it was the most difficult. But yet after I finished it, I couldn't, that was it. I mean, I was sold.
Mhm. They're the I think two types of people that finish a marathon. There's the kind that say after they cross the finish line, I'm never doing that again. And then they're the kind that cross the finish line and for a split second say, I'm never doing that again. And then immediately revert to exactly what happened to you, which is I'm hooked. And there's this great line that less than 1% of the world's population has ever run a marathon, and 100% of them will not stop talking about it. And I think it's funny because it's kind of true, but I think it's kind of true because of how impactful pushing yourself through the finish line of a marathon is, especially coming from where you came from. And so you said something that I'd love to dig a little bit into. You said my mind was already there, right? Your body might not have been prepared, but your mind was already there. And I got this visual of you had placed your mind at the finish line and you just had to go run, walk, drag yourself to it, and then you'd get there. And I love that idea of putting your mind somewhere else and then going to get it. And I'm curious if there are strategies, things that you use when you're pushing yourself now to get you to the finish line. Are you talking to yourself in a certain kind of way? Are there affirmations you're using? Are you driven by fear? Are you driven by love? Are you driven by everything and anything in between? What gets you through the hard things now since you've been doing it for a little bit?
I'd say what gets me through the hard things now is almost what it's the same thing that got me through that first marathon, which, because yeah, I was spending, a lot of my days were driving 600 miles, and then I would park and go for a 5 mile run. Um, but during those drives, that's all I thought about. It's almost like a form of like meditation in a way, to where I was quite literally visualizing it, like thinking about what it was going to look like, what it was going to feel like, because I obviously know what downtown Austin looked like, so I can actually visualize it. And so now, especially leading up to Ironman Florida, which was in November, like seeing that, because I that was something that was an opportunity that jumped in early. I was planning on my first Ironman being Texas, which just happened, which I just ran in April. But I had the opportunity to go to Florida early and I took it because I already believed I can do it. But I still had that same level of kind of fear that I did going into my first marathon of, okay, I know I can do this, but can I do this? Like, still not necessarily second guessing, but just being like, I can do this, but can I? Like, where you're thinking about it. And I just the I would quite I'd say visualization would be the best one. But now what I do what now really helps more than back then is there's a community now, and and I'm involved in communities that endorse it, that are also, so where I'm not saying the words of affirmation, I'm being given the validation by other people who know just off of, and some of these people know me maybe less than 2 years, but just from what they see, already telling me like, oh, it's in the bag. Like, you've got this crush. I saw you at that last. I saw you at endorphins on Saturday. I see how you act. I see your attitude. Like, this is it, dude. Just keep even other triathletes, other Ironman people. They're like, oh yeah, dude, you're worried about finishing. Hey,
Mm.
just eat here. You're gonna fly. You're gonna cruise right through it. So I'd say I still use visualization, but now there's a community that's behind, and a community in multiple ways. A community here locally in Austin, and then a community of other people throughout the trucking industry who want me to win. Like, there are people out there who have seen me, been kind of following me on social media for a bit, and they're rooting for me to win, because everything I do, they know is is to bring more light to the issues, circulating around the trucking industry. So there's such a huge community aspect now that is driving me to like, now I can't lose.
That is so powerful. And, there are a bunch of different thoughts running through my mind right now. But rather than spew all those out, I'll ask you the next question and we'll see where you take this. But this is the Project Endure podcast. You're on Team Endure. When you hear the word endure or endurance, what does that mean to you?
Endurance to me, because I was just at the BPN Last Man Standing race where another life-changing event I was able to witness. Um, and it really drove home how special endurance is, more than anything, and you can almost say that everything is endurance. Life is endurance in itself. Like, that's a line straight out of the Hamilton play. Like, dying is easy, living is harder. Like, just living throughout life is endurance. And so to purposely go out and do these difficult and, very out of the ordinary races and events, that you're doing that level, endurance means that, like, it's the unwavering, just, confidence that you, like, somebody will not quit. And when somebody has that endurance, and when you know somebody who's coming from that, when you know somebody who's coming from who's coming from like an Ironman family, or or this is what they're involved in, and they play around, and they're diving into the endurance world, like especially somebody new. Like, I've been talking to so many more people now, especially at, one of the gyms I go to here in Austin, who are open to the idea of wanting to run their first half marathon, wanting to run their marathon. And what's running parallel is, as they want to do these things, they're also wanting just more. They want more out of their lives in general. And there's so much, like, so as they're trying to as they're unlocking this belief that now that they can go this distance, because anybody who doesn't want to run a marathon will always say, just like I said it, like, I can't do that. They think that it's something that's just out of reach, but there's a reason why I'm not a billionaire. It's because I haven't earned $1 billion. I need to earn $1 billion to become a billionaire. And you don't just get that by winning the lottery. You don't go to the gas station, buy the marathon ticket, and then next day you're all of a sudden running 26.2 is going to come to you overnight. You kind of have to earn that, so to speak. And so as people want to get into endurance and to do mundane things over and over to build themselves up to the point to be doing that, at the same time, what's going on in their life means that they want to do something hard. They want to get a new job, level up in their career, go back to school. And so it's like endurance is this overarching, not only just like physical and athletic, skill, it's this life skill. Whereas you get into endurance and endurance sports, you're getting into the life endurance, where now, like, you're ready for the long haul of life, because there's a lot of easy ways out in life. And I know a lot of people who've taken the easy ways out, and they end up suffering from it, or they end up, or they're no longer with us in certain cases. And that's what the result, and nobody wants that result. Nobody wants that to happen. And so that's, I'd say that's what endurance means to me. If that's a good answer, if that's a valid answer.
Both valid and good. And it brings up a lot of thoughts for me. I was having a conversation with a client the other day about digging deep and pushing hard. And the sentiment that this person was expressing, more or less, was that their life is good. They have a great job, great family, a great life. So why dig deeper? Why push harder if they are on this trajectory that they're happy with? And through the conversation, I kind of brought up this idea of, well, what if you ever needed to dig down deeper? What if something came along that forced you to tap into something that was deeper and you'd never been there before, right? Wouldn't it be better if you had gone there before and you knew how far you could dig? You knew the person that was deep down inside that you could pull out if you needed. And this, I believe it's a Japanese proverb, came back into my mind, which is, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I think that we can only go as far as we're willing to go deep. It's actually a Winston Churchill quote, if I'm not mistaken. He said, the farther backward you can look, the farther forward you can see. And I think that also goes for, not only history, but within ourselves. The deeper that we can go, the further that we can go. And I'd be curious to hear your take on that as someone who has both looked back very far in terms of history, but also looked down deep within. Do you see that as being true, that the deeper we go, the further we can travel?
I have firsthand experience of that exact of how that felt, and this is what somebody told me because it felt natural as it happened. So when I came off the road, and the reason why I came off the road was because so in at the same time, so I was working on getting my A certification because I really wanted to lean into this driver health stuff that I work on so much for truck drivers. While I was doing that, I was backed into at a truck stop in Iowa. So I was backed into the truck was still drivable. It would have been a DOT violation, but but because of regulations, I was still able to uh, deliver. I was delivering a load up to Thunder Bay, Ontario, and then I got a reload back where I took a combine back to the Rio Grande Valley. But I owned the truck at the time, and the truck was it still needed to be repaired. It wasn't something that like the headlight was absolutely gone. Definitely was a lot of damage. This is over $10,000 worth of damage. Granted, I didn't have to pay for it, but when you own the truck, you pay for it because you can't drive the truck while it's being fixed. So I was down for several weeks in May into June of 2023, where I worked the door at a bar in Austin on Rainy Street, and then I also door dashed to like keep a little bit of money coming in. And I went back out on the road with full aspirations of making a comeback. Now, the trucking industry has been in a major recession. It's still very much teetering on this fine line with all this tariff stuff. Don't want to get off the weeds, but I lived a Spartan lifestyle that summer. I grinded. I was barely home and I was just skimming off for groceries. Still living healthy, by the way. Still kept up with my habits, still dialed in. And then, but it was becoming difficult. My wife definitely wanted me home because at a certain point, like we were doing, our family dynamic is great. She has a very good job. But at a certain point, like if we're talking family future, what are we doing? Like, where is the business going to be a year from now from where I currently was? It became time to pivot. During that time, I was offered a job when I was at a speaking event in Kansas City for CDL Life, where a good friend of mine, Charles, he said, dude, he asked me he's like, what's your plan for getting out of the truck? Like, you should always have like a 5-year plan. He's like, you should be a recruiter for me. And then I was also offered like the Orange Theory studio near my house where my wife was working at part time. We're saying like, we'd love to have you coach here. You have this crazy story. Like, would be so awesome. So I had an avenue out, but I still have an inherent love of the job. Like, I'm telling you that the trucking lifestyle, like it's as much as a job as it is a lifestyle, and it can become very addicting. Waking up in a new office every day, new city one day, being in St. Louis, so to speak. So I had to come to that decision, but I came to that decision, but I wasn't making any money. So that's the thing. So I wasn't making any money. Like best case scenario, I could break even a year from then. Worst case scenario, I go bankrupt or whatever. So it's like I could either break even now or pray I break even a year from now. And so I made the decision. But when I came off the road, 3 days later, I was at coaches training for Orange Theory and I was at orientation for a new job. And my friend, another trucker, Chris Tackett, he said, dude, that it's insane to me that you parked your truck and now you're on the mic at a gym, like doing group fitness classes. And that's like that idea of looking back. So everything when everything's going great, and everything was going great when before I had gotten back into, money was good. I was moving tractors, Port of Baltimore, like I was doing all right. I was doing specialized freight. Things were going well. If that setback happened to me in 2017 or 2018 at a certain point, the littlest things would derail me. The littlest inconveniences had derailed me ever since I got out of the Marine Corps. Like I would end up pushing through, but man, did I hate it, and I would figure it out, and I probably could have came out of so many situations better. So if that situation happened in 2017, 2018, before any of this, I don't know how I would have navigated myself out of the truck. I would have probably cried, complained, the economy, I would have had a really big victim mindset. Why is this happening to me? Look at all the good stuff I've done. Why is this bad stuff happening? But instead, I literally parked the truck and boom, I'm on the mic now, training people that like within a matter of that next week. So a career change from trucker to group fitness coach, and also a job I'd never done before, which is driver recruiting. So which is kind of like similar to a sales job, an immediate like a hard stop pivot to the right. Like, and I've never done that. And I don't think if I didn't do the stuff I did, if I didn't run 5 marathons as a trucker, I don't think I'm able to just pause, turn, and go in that next direction without weeks of, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm going to like, the world stinks. Like, I don't think that I just don't believe that that would have happened.
I think that while hard things might look different to different people in different seasons and sectors of life, right? Running might not seem like it has immediate surface level carryover to a career change. There absolutely is this quality that comes from doing hard things over and over and over again that is transferable to every other area of life. And it might not be perfect, it might not be quick, but you're by doing hard things, we are building this ability, this self belief, this confidence that I can show up and I can do difficult things and I can adapt, I can survive, and I could even thrive. And that carries over all the time. And so, before we get into the final question, Mike, which is a big one, and I'm excited to hear your answer because you are one of the most encouraging, passionate, just positive people that I've ever met. Before we go there, I want to throw out a quote, and you can confirm this for me because you're the Napoleon guy. I wasn't sure if this was his quote or not. So you tell me if this is him or if it's not him. But the quote is that amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. Is that Napoleon or no?
No, I'm pretty sure I think there might be multiple people who've said that. I think there's multiple generals who say that, but I do think that I think the words have changed, but I'm pretty sure that that would be a Napoleon quote. But I think it might not be professionals. It's like it's either professionals talk this and then and generals talk tactics. Yeah, or it's yeah, talk logistics or talk tactics. But I think part of that quote is linked to Napoleon.
Sure. So, with that being said, I would imagine that, like myself, a lot of people listening to this, they've heard the word logistics. They understand what logistics is, but they don't really understand why logistics could be so important or why it could be so profound or why we should care about it at all. And I'm not just talking trucking, moving things around, but logistics as a concept. Why is logistics something that you care about?
Like the supply chain in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially and a lot of it has to do with the health perspective. So, number one, it is, I don't think people seem to realize that when it comes to the U.S. supply chain, I think the U.S. supply chain is one of the most taken for granted things in the country besides whatever bodily autonomy you have. I think, I think the ability to reach your hand over your head is something that people take for granted a lot. The next would be the U.S. supply chain. We saw that during COVID when the tears were flying over toilet paper when demand had increased for relatively no reason, and it is held together by a very thin line. The industry has multiple issues. For what it's worth, if you get into the industry, if you're a freight broker, if you're a driver, when it comes to blown tires, this and that. But yet if you go to the gas station right now, you can get gas. If you go to gas, you can get cigarettes, you can get laundry detergent, you can get it, and you don't even think about it. And I think that's one of the most, and it involves a lot. It involves the ships that are overseas right now. It involves the ships that run the Mississippi River. It involves every train that does not stop moving. This is something that takes no breaks. You want to talk about endurance? The U.S. supply chain takes absolutely no breaks at any given point in time. There are over 1 million trucks driving on the road, and there are trains that will not stop moving. And if that doesn't just absolutely gas you up and like get you fired up, that there's absolute machine that works to keep you fueled, to keep clothes on your back, because everything you own, from no matter what, and this is the same way how cannons don't discriminate. No matter if you're the Kardashians or if you are a dock worker in Dundalk, Maryland, like whatever you got came from a truck, or no matter what, you might think that just because Amazon delivered it, at one point it was on a tractor trailer, at one point it was on a ship. Like no matter what, over 75% of freight hauled in this country comes from trucks. So that's definitely why the supply chain is important. Transitioning, right, why I'm so passionate about it, especially from the health perspective, is because of the driver health epidemic we have going on. We right now, because of the job, two-thirds of drivers are considered obese, and two-thirds of drivers report having one or more chronic diseases, being heart disease, high blood pressure, et cetera, any form of chronic disease. And so that tells me, in comparison, that's just the trucking industry. In comparison, a third of the entire US working class population is obese. So it's double that in trucking what it is for everybody else in just one industry, which tells me it's not an individual issue. This is an environmental and systemic issue that we have built, that is costing people's lives. The job is removing 16 years off of people's lives. And so where there's a moral issue to this about how we need to be doing more and better and changing the environment for America's truckers and merchant mariners and beyond, anywhere in the supply chain, it's a huge safety issue to people out there. The people do not deserve to be, drive like when you are driving next to big trucks on the highway, you could be driving next to the next heart attack, the next stroke, and that's not the way it should be. That's not the supply chain we deserve. That's not the supply chain Americans deserve. It doesn't need to be that way, and I think and it just takes. It's going to take me my entire lifetime, I think, to continue working on it. I've called it Mission Impossible, and that's exactly why I'm so gassed up about it. Is because it's like that last man standing race. There's no finish line. Like there is no success. I don't think there's any success in it. It's just something I'm going to probably be doing for the rest of my life, in hopes of just making the environment better for other people and hopefully leaving the industry better than I found it.
I have no doubt that'll be the case, Mike. And you gas me up about trucking, and I have no ties to trucking, no direct ties, of course. But you gas me up, you fire me up. And I'm excited for you to fire people up with your answer to this last question, because again, there are people listening to this podcast all over the world who are going through all sorts of things. Some of them they chose, they're pursuing hard things. Others, they're handling hard things, and the hard found them, it chose them. But no matter who we're talking to and what they're going through, if someone's in a tough season of life right now, what would you say to them?
And I think I've said this to you before, but there's a couple things. So especially if somebody's looking for motivation, because I get asked this a lot, is how did you stay motivated over the road? How did you stay motivated to lose 100 pounds? And again, the motivation is a short-term thing. And what I've come to learn is I didn't need motivation. What I needed was a standard. Um, overall. And I think and you have a standard. So for anybody out there who's going through something hard, for anybody out there who's kind of hurting, you have a standard, whether you think so or not. You have a standard that because you do deserve more. You deserve to win. You deserve to get the achievements you want, the job you want. You need that standard, not that motivation. And it's about living up to that standard every single day. And that doesn't mean being perfect every single day. That just means living up to that standard as best you can over a certain period of time, and you're going to find your way out of that hole. And again, when it comes to people who are going through that dark time, people need to realize, and listeners of this need to realize, because I've made it a mission to change the culture of health and fitness and overall wellness in the trucking industry. But this isn't just related to trucking. This is nationwide. This goes beyond. And kind of to get economically speaking, economically speaking, trucking leads the nation into a recession. So as trucking starts to fail, that's when the economy goes down. In the same aspect, when trucking starts to improve, that's when the economy follows with it. As trucking gets better, then the economy starts to pick back up. And so I think where we have this major health issue in trucking, I think that's what happened. We've led the country down into it. And I think it should be up to trucking to lead us out of it. And I believe that if me, a truck driver who used to, you know, it'd be incredibly overweight, a warehouse worker who is incredibly overweight can somehow go from like me. There's nothing redeeming about me. There's nothing. I didn't go to Yale. I didn't go to. I didn't come from some. I'm not related to a senator. Like I am related to an obscure, trucking family whose father grinds metal in Plainville, Connecticut. There is nothing redeeming about me. Absolutely nothing special about my upbringing. Unlike kind of other people. Like I'm not a Vanderbilt. I'm not a Carnegie. When you think about the names of who built this country, that's nothing of what I've done. I was not given any of these things. And so if I can come out and somehow become an Iron Man out of all of this with the 100-pound weight loss testimony of never even being a runner, then what I can tell you is I didn't get to this point for myself only. So if you are somebody, and I said this to you, I believe during the Team Endure call, like if you are somebody, you got to reach out. Like if you are in the trenches, and because I'm kind of like getting this from that gentleman, Simon Sinek. Like if you are in the trenches, I want to be the guy you call. Like I want to be like, if we may not know each other, if you find me on the internet and shoot me a message and we hop on the phone, I want to be the guy you call when you're in there because we can figure it out. That no matter what you're going through, whether it could be the loss of a loved one, it could be a breakup. I can tell you, I can help you navigate through these situations, and I can do it because I have a community of people I want to line you up with. Is that I'm telling you, when it seems dark, there was a point in time I'll never forget where I was sitting in my Jeep Wrangler, smoking a cigarette, absolutely in disbelief that this is where my life had become. This is where I became, where I could not believe that I got out of the Marine Corps and that this was what the rest of my life was going to look like. And this was when I was working in that sales job after college. I was like, this was it. This was going to be my life. There was no upward trajectory. There was nothing, like there was no clear path in front of me. I had like the ideas of anything were gone. I was in one of the darkest places mentally, but yet I kept going. Yet I kept persisting. Somehow I showed up the next day and just kept going through it. And when you keep going through it, and when you keep going through it, you will start to believe in yourself. Have that, go back to exactly what I said. You don't need motivation. You need a standard. And that standard needs to be in your eyes, in your mind. And when you can see that standard and you hold it up and you look at that every single day, I need to be at that standard, then you're going to win. There's no doubt you're going to win. But if you are in the trenches, if you're in the down deep, if you don't know where to go, I want to be the guy to call. And if I'm not the guy you're going to call, then I take offense to not being the guy getting called, because that's what I was put here to do, was to be that guy.
Hmm. Well, Mike, I think the natural question for the listeners is, if they are in the trenches, if they resonate with something you said, if they want to connect and just follow along, where do they do that?
They can find me anywhere at Lombard Trucking, Lombard, trucking, Trucking. You can email me at mike@lombardtrucking.com as well. If you're local in Austin, Texas, I'm available. And we going right back to the history, and I know we're running out of time, but this is also the reason why I value history so much. And from the stories of Napoleon or going back to Alexander the Great, is I look at history as the barometer of what we can possibly do. There are so many people throughout times. There are thousands of years across European battlefields, and even in the American Civil War, when you read those stories of kind of what people had to go through in those times, and you saw how they were able to come out victorious. When you see against all odds, you take Napoleon's taking command of the army of Italy where they had no shoes, and yet they come out fully victorious. These are people who had spent a decade losing losing over and over and over again, watching their best friends get absolutely turned into Swiss cheese and blown apart, and they were able to come out of that victorious. When you look at the causes people have gone to war for over the years, and they've come out victorious, there are people like, so if you are tired, somebody has been there tired with you. If you are beaten down and broken, somebody has been right there with you the entire time 1,000 years ago, and they had a lot less resources to go after it. You have every resource at your disposal to get nothing but absolute victory.
Wow. Mike, I think I'm going to be listening back to this the next time I'm in the trenches. And I'm grateful to have you in my circle as a friend. And I'm just very, very appreciative of the light you are in this world, the passion you bring to every aspect of what you do. And I know people listening to this can't see you, but you look like I would imagine you look if I'm listening. You've got the mullet, you've got the mustache, you've got the headset. And my last question for you is, will that look ever change?
I don't know. I've been really on the fence. I've had in my head, I said, I don't think I can, because the hair is part of my silhouette at this point. Same thing with the glasses. And I've said, I don't think I'll cut it till I go gray. But then everybody I tell that to, they're like, dude, if it was gray, it would look cooler. And so I might be on this road for quite some time.
Well, I think it looks great. I think you should keep it. And once again, just thank you, Mike. I appreciate you.
Thank you for this opportunity for coming out here and kind of getting into full character like this, especially that last bit. Like I feel that way in my brain all the time. Like when I'm out on a run, I just want to scream out to the world how strong they are, how powerful people are to strangers. I want to say that to perfect strangers. I say it to strangers during marathons. If you catch me, I've said it before, the best place you want to be during a marathon is somewhere in my vicinity, because I yell at strangers and talk to them because people need to know how powerful they are, because I used to feel powerless too. And I'm telling you, people have no idea just how amazing they are and how valuable they are to the people around them. And they've got it. They've got it. And if I need to help them find it, sure. But I know that they have the capability of finding it themselves. And if I could just be that push, then all the better.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Endure podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.